Well, welcome back, everyone. Yesterday, we looked at some of the foundational terms that involve groups and teams. Today, we're going to look at how teams form. We're going to take a look also at team performance. Just because you have a team or a group doesn't mean that it's going to accomplish the ends that you are looking for. So today, let's take a look at some of these fundamentals of processes and formation and performance. Well, welcome back, everybody, and we're going to continue on with groups and teams out of Chapter 7. Now, another thing that is important to know about groups is the idea of group norms. Now, group norms are the standards against which the appropriateness of the behaviors of members are judged. For instance, you get into an organization that is doing its own thing and there are no standards. You've got chaos. Wherever you go, normally, if there is a collection of people, whether it's a group, team, organization, or whatever, they will have norms of behavior that have been established over the years. For instance, at church, you have standards for behavior. You may have to dress a certain way. And there are still some churches that I know of that if you don't have a decent pair of clothes or sometimes even a suit or tie, there are some that will frown upon you. There are norms, just ways of behaving that aren't necessarily written down, but they are expected to be enforced or adhered to, and then they are enforced by the people. So group norms affect performance. Determine behavior expected in a certain situation, and that's, again, what norms will do. Result from personality characteristics of members, and a lot of times, as you see, the group is a reflection of the personalities. If you have a pretty laid-back group that get along, that's probably going to be a reflection of their personalities. If you have the extroverts that are very aggressive and so forth, you may have a volatile group. So a lot of times the personality of the members will determine the makeup and the norms of the group. The situation also determines the norms, the historical traditions of the group. The older the group is, the more ingrained these norms are going to be. The longer that a group gets together, the more they're going to expect certain behaviors because, well, it's just like the old adage, this is the way we've always done it. And that's pretty much true when it comes to groups. This is the way it is, this is the way we are, and this is the way we're going to do things. And they're enforced only for actions that are important to group members. It's not going to make a difference what you do outside the group as far as the group is concerned. They're going to be concerned with what happens and the behaviors that occur while you are there in that group performing that group function. What is the purpose of a norm? Well, a norm helps the group survive. When you look at groups forming, they have to engage in behaviors that are going to perpetuate the group. So those behaviors start to become just expected norms of behavior, rules of behavior. So they help the group survive and persist. They simplify and increase predictability of expected behaviors of group members, and that's correct. If you know that something is not going to be accepted by the group, chances are you won't engage in that behavior. You'll be able to predict what they would say or how they would react if a person or you went against that norm, and it helps the group to avoid embarrassing situations. It expresses the group's central values for membership identification and identifies the group to others. And then group cohesiveness is I'm just going to go ahead and, went a little bit too far. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at group cohesiveness in its entirety. Cohesiveness is the amount of unity, how close the individuals are to the organization itself. Now, a study was done back some decades ago in Hawthorne, Pennsylvania by a guy named Elton Mayo. and it's called today the Hawthorne Studies. And here, through these studies, they were able to identify the relativeness of cohesiveness, what cohesion is. They saw that it was among the workers who were there. They pitted the best performers against the lowest performers, and they thought that the best performers, this was at the General Electric plant in Hawthorne, Pennsylvania, they pitted the best workers against the worst workers, and they thought the best workers were going to outshine the worst workers, but as it turns out, the best workers started to slack off because they didn't want to let their co-workers look bad. And that's where they started to realize, researchers started to realize the importance of cohesion in the workplace. So it's the extent to which a group is committed to staying together, and it results from forces acting on the members, the attraction to the group, resistance to leaving the group, and the motivation to remain a member of the group. So the more attractive the group is, and the more fulfilling it is, the more cohesive that group is going to be. Now, when it comes to team performance, there is process gain and process loss. Process gain is dealing with performance improvements that occur because people work together rather than alone. And that's that synergy thing again. When you go back and look at what we were saying about the individual efforts of people won't gain the dividends that individuals working together will gain, because the individual efforts combined will produce something greater than the individual parts. And process loss means quite the opposite. These are decrements, or decreases that occur when a team performs worse than the individual members who would have produced something had they worked alone. Now, social loafing is a common cause of process loss. Now, social loafing occurs when you have members in a team who will let everybody else do the work, but they won't. They'll goof off, or they'll loaf around, and they'll let the other members do the work. I've given out in the past group projects in school, and I've given them the whole semester to complete a project, not at this school, but other schools. And invariably, I'll get calls throughout the semester where the students are complaining, so-and-so does not show up for the meeting, so-and-so is not putting in his or her effort, and so forth. So social loafing can not only cause dissension in that group, but it'll also demotivate. It also affects productivity because other people are having to take up the slack, not only doing their job, but the job of the person who is loafing around. So that's a common problem in many teams when it comes to performance. Team efficacy is the team's belief that it can organize and execute the behaviors necessary to reach its goals. And usually during the norming stage, if you remember, I told you there are 5 different stages that they go through: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. During the norming stage, this is where they start to realize, hey, if we're going to get things done, we need to work together. And we can achieve this if we work together. So that's where efficacy comes in. It's the belief and the realization that they can make the goals come about. Trust and social facilitation. Trust is that the members will honor their commitments, especially when this is difficult to enforce. If you have, let's say, for instance, a global team and you aren't in their immediate vicinity, you have to trust that they're going to do their job. Social facilitation occurs when people are motivated to look good to others and want to maintain a positive self-image. No one wants to let the other person down. They want to make sure that they are seen as a productive member of that group. Roles, and let me go ahead and just go through this. See if we've got one more. Nope. Okay, let's go back. Roles, these are the behaviors and tasks each member has and is expected to perform because of the position he or she holds. Now, there are different dimensions of roles. There's role ambiguity, there's role confusion, there's role conflict, there's all types of roles, but roles are the performance expectations. You are expected to do this or that, and that's your role. There are other factors such as norms, shared team goals, feedback, rewards, new member integration that your textbook talks about. These are all factors that can affect whether or not a team is able to meet its goals or not. Now, there are phases of team implementation. You have at the very bottom the genesis of it all, make the decision, plan the implementation, and then you have the phases that a team will go through. You have the startup, the reality and unrest, the leader-centered teams, tightly formed teams, and then self-managing teams. So we'll go into these here in the next couple of slides, but this is just kind of a visual depiction of what they're explaining here. So changing to a team-based situation, planning the change, implementing, which includes startup, and that's selecting and training the new members. It also involves identifying team boundaries. You adjust the preliminary plan to fit the particular team situation. So once you have assessed your team, then you want to make sure, does the team and the plan fit? If not, you need to make adjustments. You have reality and unrest. This is where you need, as a manager or the team leader, to provide encouragement, monitor team performance. You need to give them quantifiable goals throughout their life cycle. It doesn't have to be anything major, but you do need to give them tasks that you can measure periodically to assess whether or not they're in the right direction or go in the right direction. Act as intermediaries between teams if you have multiple teams going. Help teams acquire needed resources, and that's what you really do if you're the leader or the manager. You're there to get them what they need. You're the resource allocator, an acquisition expert. And foster the right type of communication. Here, the leader needs to understand the fundamentals of communication. We do teach that, and you need to be familiar with how communication works, the process of communication, especially as we look at the many ways that miscommunication can take place. But again, there are courses on that, and there are sections in this textbook, I believe, and others where we teach you how to communicate and how to manage that. And then protect them from those who want to see them fail. I don't see that really in a lot of organizations unless there's a lot of conflict and you have interdepartmental conflict and fighting. But you are there to put the best foot forward. You're there to encourage them and to insulate them from anything that would prevent them from being able to accomplish their tasks. Now, the leader-centered team is where you encourage strong internal team leaders. You're kind of mentoring and developing them. You assist each team in development of its own sense of identity. Not every team is going to be a cookie-cutter model of each. They're going to be unique in their personality makeup. A lot of times the objectives and the nature of the teams will differ, so it needs to form its own identity, and you can help with that. Now, tightly formed teams, they're communicating better. They provide performance feedback both outward and from the outside in. There's two-way communication going between the team and the organization, between the leader and the organization and the team. So communication is flowing much smoother than it has in the past. And then you can transfer authority, responsibility to all team members. Here's where they're starting to work more autonomously than in the past. Now you have here the self-managed team, and that's keeping teams on track. Continued interpersonal skill training. You're always developing, you're always training, you're always investing in those team members. Look at what support systems are in place and see what you can do to provide better support, whether it's more along the lines of productivity or personal development or personnel development, and you can see that team pretty much working on its own, and that's the goal of a self-managed team. And then look at the improvement of the internal customer-supplier relationship. And here you see, once again, the stages. You have the startup, reality unrest, leader-centered teams, tightly formed teams, self-managing teams. All of these are just stages that you can go through with your teams in an organization, from the time they are just green and first starting out until the time when they are at the end and performing at peak efficiency and effectiveness. And really, that's what you want with all of your teams, but it's not going to happen overnight. It is a lengthy process that you have to invest both effort and time in. And here are some of the benefits of teams in organizations. You have enhanced performance, benefits, reduced costs, and there are other organizational benefits as well, which your textbook talks about. This is Table 7.2. Just elaborates a little bit more on examples of how teams have benefited organizations. For instance, enhanced performance. General Electric, one plant increased productivity by 20%. And when you take a look at how competition is today, folks, that's a big, big gain. Employee benefits. Milwaukee Mutual gives employee assistance program. Their usage dropped to 40% below industry average. Reduced costs. Wilson Sporting Goods saved $10 million per year. And then for other organizational benefits, you see Motorola, for instance, challenged a long-standing top management policy which reduced cycle times and improved delivery of crucial parts. So you see here just the way that teams are administered and used and developed can make a big difference in a company. But now let me say this as a word of warning. Today, teams are a popular term. It was even more so back about a decade ago. You had everybody creating teams just for the sake of creating teams. Your chart here mentions Motorola. Well, Motorola got into trouble because when the big heyday of teams came about, everybody was creating teams and Motorola wanted to jump on the bandwagon. Well, they created multiple research and development teams. And they said, okay, let's innovate, let's be the dominant company in this industry, and they were already the industry leader. Well, all of these research and development teams got to work, but the problem was that they were not connected. There was no communication between these teams. There was no formal way of looking at what other teams were doing. And to make a long story short, they had duplicated efforts. Teams were working on the same thing really without even knowing it. And as a result, they lost a significant amount of money. They laid off and they lost their market leadership position to Nokia. So just because you have a team does not mean that that's the magic wand that's going to make your company the best in the world. You have to know, first of all, what is the need here at this organization? Why are we creating a team, or why do we need to have a team? And then once you've determined that, you want to find out, what does this team need to do? What do we need to gain from this team? And give them objectives and timelines. So, and as you see here, you can go through these phases and create very well producing, efficient, effective teams to propel your company into the leadership role in that industry. But knowing what you need, why you need it, and how teams can help you in that endeavor will be crucial. Well, as you saw, teams don't just happen. They come along through a process that involves intentionality. The organization needs to understand why it needs a team and why it wants a team and what those expectations are going to be. They need to understand, too, the challenges that come with the formation, that it's not something that will operate efficiently and effectively overnight. And they need to realize, too, that as the team emerges, the managers, the traditional managers, need to decrease in their authority and scope. Well, I hope you've had a good time with this chapter so far. We're going to finish up with the end point of Chapter 7 as we take a look primarily at virtual teams. So until then, you have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.